right, let's get into it with Bob right now.
You're a Bay Area guy?
Oops. I am a Bay Area guy. I grew up in New Jersey. I moved to LA in '88 to be Guns N' Roses, and then I ended up here. My parents live up here, so I ended up in Alamo, outside of Walnut Creek.
Oh, okay. Oh, no kidding. All right. Have you seen the Bay Area Godfathers we did yet?
Dude, I watched it last night.
Awesome.
I can't believe it was. Am I doing the math right? Your movie Bay Area Godfathers, that Motley Crue were in Walnut Creek doing a signing?
Yes. Yeah.
Just
they used to come up here. I mean, we're talking when they were still a local band. I think Testament talks about it. When they came up for they would come up and do some shows at the Stone. They did some of their earliest shows at the Stone. Yeah, when they were still a local band.
Did you see any of those shows?
Not in the Bay Area. I saw them as a local band in LA.
Okay, so where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Orange County. So
okay.
I grew up in that whole LA scene. I just recently moved out here when we started the Bay Area Godfathers movie, and I've only been here a couple of years. So
okay, I was in a band. You probably don't know Blackboard Jungle on the post Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, I remember them.
Yeah, but you really in Inside Metal, the LA scene explodes. What I love is you capture that picture that we remember hearing about as kids in Circus, where you'd have Armored Saint next to Crew. And even when you brought up Pandemonium, there was no I not dotted. You just got everything, man.
That was our idea. I said, well, if I had the opportunity to do this documentary series on LA, and I don't want to make it just the typical, these days it's, as it's all about money and the big artists. And it's like, there's been enough about Poison and Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Warren and not that whole LA scene. The LA scene, as you lived through it, was so much more than that. And some of these bands that never made it big, years later, back in the early 80s, they were huge. They were the ones that were, selling out the clubs and all that. And I said, we got to include that whole scene and make it, the whole spectrum of the hard rock metal scene. Not just thrash, not just glam, not this. So, let's get the Rats, let's get the Armored Saints, let's get, in the Bay Area one, let's get the Davy Vanes and the Testaments and, the Forbiddens, as well as, bands like Head On from the Bay Area that never made it, or, bands from LA that, Pandemonium, as you mentioned, were very, very big in the early 80s, but they never really made it past that. So, Racer X, other bands like that, guitar-oriented bands. We want to cover the whole spectrum and cover the scene how it was back then, and kind of give people like yourself a trip back through time. And I think that's what people love. Especially the real devoted, purist fans out there. They really want to get taken back to that time. And hear it from the artist's point of view, not to get some idiot's point of view that wasn't on the scene back then, trying to tell you what it was like, and that's what, I think a lot of these documentaries have become now. It's not real. It's not, to me, documentaries are fact-based stuff. So let's tell it from the artist's point of view. And I really wanted to give it that, and we covered, especially in the LA metal scene explodes. I think there were over 100 people that were interviewed for that one, and they were all major players on the LA scene at the time, whether it be artists or maybe promoters or radio DJs or whatever. They were like on that scene, and they lived, breathed that metal scene just like the bands did.
Yeah, and you really did hit everything and how it went together. That's why because I know that scene, even though I live up here. I don't know I moved up to the Bay Area, and I know about the Mike Varney scene. I've heard about the Day in the Dirt with Slayer, but seeing it all put together, you finally told me the story, through Billy Rowe, through Davey, through Guys in Testament. I got the story kind of, okay, this is the line and how it went.
Yeah, well, that was important. And, fortunately for the Bay Area Godfathers, as I mentioned, I grew up in Orange County, but I followed that Bay Area scene really closely. I mean, I had a fanzine called The Headbanger. I don't know if you remember that from back in the day. It was the days of Circus, 80,
Yeah.
82, I started it. And, I covered, Metallica as a club band, Slayer in the clubs, and, Megadeth's first interview and all that stuff, as well as the Armored Saints and a lot of the European and new wave of British heavy metal bands. That was kind of my thing. And so I was really into what was going on in the Bay Area. So I knew about it. I had the pen pals up there, Ron Quintana, people like that. We would trade our zines with. He did Metal Mania. So I would read about all the cool bands up in that area. And I knew Mike Varney. I had the US Metal Records. So that was an interesting scene. And I know a lot of the LA bands, as Metallica and later Slayer and all these bands would go up to the Bay Area and play the Stone and just go, man, the scene up there. So I knew a lot of that, but I wanted to really get people that, like I said, that lived that scene. So John Stranansky, who I've known for years, who I also was a pen pal with and traded magazines. He had Metal Rendezvous, which you may remember.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was the editor there and, real close friend. And I wrote a lot for Metal Rendezvous back in the 80s. So and he was looking for something to do. And so I got him on as co-producer, and he hooked me up with a lot of these bands, as well as the guys from Reality Check TV, Danny Shipman, who edited the movie and also became a co-producer. They provided a lot of the film footage because, I had a lot of film footage for the LA titles, the Inside Metal titles, but for the Bay Area stuff, we didn't have that much. And of course, we're working on a small budget, so we can't afford a lot of stuff. So I brought them in as a production team, and Danny Shipman and Hugh provided a lot of great, material, as you've seen. A little bit later, I think they covered it from like 89 or 90 on, but still they got a lot of those bands continued on from there. So, it worked, and so it made it really legit. We had that, that Bay Area bond.
Yeah. And, you really made it feel like you watched it go from dirty little clubs to international.
Yeah.
And you stayed more in the dirty clubs. And what I love, which is my dream, is you went to the venues now and then. I don't know why I got such a chill when you stand outside the old Waldorf and you go, this is the door. Because if you love music, I still do that stuff where you ride somewhere, you go, oh, that's where the Grateful Dead formed. That's where Nicky and Tommy lit, and that was really cool.
Yeah, we thought it'd be cool because, John Stranansky came up, he lives in Texas now, in Dallas, and he came up like 2 or 3 weekends and we filmed. And this one weekend, we didn't really have any artist films, or someone had canceled or whatever. And we had the idea, let's take a drive up to some of these old venues. And, because people love that. And of course, the Bay Area has changed more than anything. I mean, at least even in LA, you still have the Whiskey, the Roxy, the Rainbow, and they haven't changed that much. I mean, the front might have changed paint wise and whatever, but in the San Francisco, as everyone knows, it just became a tech capital, and it just the corporate just took over. That you look at the old Waldorf or the Stone, and it's like completely. It was like, what the fuck happened?
I sound like a crazy because I work on Embarcadero Pier 3 on the boats there. And when I walk up with friends, then I go, that it's just unbelievable that this is. I love when you described it as that block, because I remember Sunset between Clark and Doheny, that block. I never thought of like you really had that thrash block right there, because people talk about. My friend Captain Jeff talks about Spastic Children at the On Broadway or whatever it was then, and just crazy shows like that. Really was a block that shaped the musical world.
Yeah, I think every major city has that zone where the metalheads hung out, and of course in LA it was more of a glam thing, with the Sunset Strip, and in Orange County we had these two clubs, Woodstock and Radio City, that were next to each other, and that parking lot was kind of where everyone hung out, and I think like you said, in the Bay Area, that was it. And it's cool. I mean, it's kind of they make it their own, and it's where all the action happens, and you have a few promoters that are into similar music and book the bands that the kids love, and it was a good vibe. And our thing is these times have passed, 30 years passed, and we're not like saying, oh yeah, we got to bring this back. It's good, it's never going to come back to like that, as you know, but it's a good memory. And it's good for people like us that grew up during that time, that were fortunate to remember that time and go back in history and kind of relive that era. And it's great for the young kids to realize, man, kids nowadays growing up on Metallica and Slayer and, Motley Crue and whoever, that have no idea. They might have read about it here and there, but now they really get a chance to visualize it. And again, hear it directly from the artist's mouth of how that scene was back then. And I've had so many young fans, and they just said it was just an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, it's a good education. It is like, there's certain things that come out. Like I thought the Nothing But a Good Time book you could hand to somebody if you want to learn about the Sunset Strip and go, this is pretty good. You got it right here. And your movies, I really feel like they tell a lot, because I understand where Ingve sits in with San Francisco and like the way you made everything coexist. I guess because it didn't coexist, or fights, but it did coexist, because it wasn't like hair metal threat. It all coexist, because you look at Hetfield, even in early pictures, he's got zebra skin, there was evolution. Metallica wore spandex, you know what I mean?
Well, everything started from something, and it all started obviously from the 70s bands, and then UFO, Judas Priest, even Zeppelin, Sabbath, Purple, all that kind of stuff. And then of course, when the new wave of British heavy metal came out, that was the thing. But in the very early 80s, everyone looked the same, everyone played the same, everyone was playing the same covers, Judas Priest, UFO, and then of course, when Maiden's first record came out, everyone was trying to do Maiden covers. But whether you were a glam band that turned into a glam band or a metal band, that was it. I mean, Hetfield was in a band called Leather Charm, which was kind of a glam band that did all cover songs, and so everyone evolved from that era, and that was what the era was. And again, this is before all the subgenres, hair metal, thrash.
I would say post Us Festival, it really splintered. Post 83,
Yeah, exactly. 83 is when it really,
because Crew stayed with Maiden and Priest. It was once Rat and Poison, who I love. Right. But you started to have to pick a gang, as I said.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened. And before then there weren't subgenres. It was just rock and roll, man. It was
we fought to have long hair. We were the we fought for our long hair, and
sure.
It's funny that you're talking about that. One thing I love that you mentioned, the importance of On Through the Night is mentioned in one of the movies of Def Leppard. And that really was thrashers, metalheads, guys that were going to be glam. On Through the Night was a very important album.
That was the first new, it's funny because the new wave of British heavy metal, we were introduced in America by Def Leppard, because that was really the first band that broke through that had a deal. I mean, Def Leppard. Iron Maiden's first album came out on Harvest, which I guess was through EMI. And that was kind of hard to get. Saxon's Wheels of Steel was on a kind of an indie label, Carrera. And Motorhead, Ace of Spades finally came out domestically. So those were the records, and then you had a couple other bands, Marseille and more, that, came out domestically, and Tigers of Pantang on MCA. But, Diamond Head, Angel Witch, all those other stuff, they were on import. So unless you were an underground guy and going to the import stores, you didn't know of that. But everyone knew about Def Leppard. They came over here. They toured with Pat Travers and then with Judas Priest and a couple other bands. And they were really the first band from that new wave of British heavy metal era to make a mark. And God, that first album was great. I mean, Wasted, It Could Be You. I mean, so many cool riffs. I mean, Pete Ellis was just a riff meister. But yeah, they were, when you say, they were metal, they were new wave of British heavy metal. No, Def Leppard, they're posers. No, man, listen to that first record,
Yeah.
The second album, High and Dry, had some really heavy tunes too. Yeah, I mean, a lot of bands, again, like we said, back in the day, everything was kind of as one, and then it kind of, branched out to other stuff, which is cool. Bands, do their thing. And, I mean, obviously it worked for Def Leppard. They became one of the biggest bands in the world.
I love his Hysteria changed music. They continue to evolve, like Metallica. Just two bands that continue to evolve. You were talking earlier about those two clubs in Orange County and the parking lot. The parking lot was such an important part of growing up in metal. A lot went down in the parking lot.
Yeah. Just watch Heavy Metal Parking Lot. It was. That's what, my favorites was, you go to the Long Beach Arena. And that was when, people were allowed to drink in the parking lot. It wasn't that it was allowed, but if cops came, you had to hide the beers or whatever. But you didn't have the security, so you would just have like they do at football games now. What do you call them? Tailgating. They had a lot of that at the Long Beach Arena when you see Judas Priest or UFO or AC/DC or whatever there. You would get there early, and we would just walk around from cars to cars. You would just hear people cranking metal, and everyone was cool. Hey, bro, have a beer, man. There were a few fights or whatever, but it was just rock and roll. It was anything goes, and it was so new and fresh because it was this is when the metal scene was just really exploding. When Long Beach Arena in the early '80s was coming out, and just the excitement. Nowadays, kids, you go to a concert, they means nothing. They watch it, they're just filming the whole time or on their phone. Back then, it was just such an experience because you didn't know when the next concert was going to be. That was the only time you could see a band live, unless you stayed up till 1 a.m. to watch Don Kirshner's rock concert. A lot of this was even before MTV. I'm talking. So it was a whole different experience. So people made the most of it. People got there early, partied, got wasted. Yeah, it was.
Even though it's horrible, we were talking about live albums and the sound of fireworks going off on the Nugent albums and the Aerosmith albums. Fireworks were even a part of it. Fan fireworks, not band fireworks.
Fan-oriented bootleg by Aerosmith. That's all you hear is all these fireworks, just firecrackers going off in the arena with that echo. I just remember that.
Just warms you, man. How did you get into this? How did you get into making the films? Were you making films? Because how did this come about for you?
Well, to keep a long story short, I was always a metalhead. Growing up, I had an older cousin. He turned me on to the Sabbath, Purple, early Humble Pie, Zeppelin. 10 years after, a lot of the we'd make these compilation tapes. Some Alice Cooper, even Bowie. And that kind of got me into. I just loved it. We're talking 70s, early mid 70s, when I was just a kid. And, from then on, I just dug it. And when, the new wave of British heavy metal broke and I saw these fanzines like, Brian Slago had the new heavy metal review, and Ron Quintana, as I mentioned, did Metal Mania. It was like, wow, I decided to put some together and put together the Headbanger. And that really got my foot in the door as doing something. And it was just a cheesy Xerox fanzine, by a fan. It was,
which you talk about in the films, which I love. Yeah.
But
they were important to us, especially being in Jersey, getting something like that. You're like, whoa.
Yeah. And even in Jersey, I know there was a great magazine from Bob Nalbandian, Kick-Ass Monthly in New York. Every city kind of had, or every of the major cities kind of had their scene. The Bay Area had their zine, I should say, had a few zines. We did, and we all came from the same school. We were just fans. We were, it's funny how people like Slagle and other people became Mike Varney. They became these huge, moguls in the metal community. But back then, we were even Lars. He was just a metal fan. When I first met Lars, and I would go to his condo in Newport Beach. It was when he was just forming Metallica, and he was just like the biggest metal fan you could ever meet. So we were all on that level, and it was just kind of cool. And it just kind of started from there. I did the fanzine, and then throughout the 80s, I managed a couple bands. I managed a band called Eden that were on Enigma, and that was a lot of fun. They were great guys. They were the former guys from a band called August Red Moon, who were really early on the metal Orange County metal scene. Then from there, just I worked at Roadrunner in a few different places, and that kind of led up to when Joe Floyd, who I knew very well, who was in the great band Warrior, Fighting for the Earth. I always have to say, one of my favorite LA bands, one of the most underrated.
I love that logo. We had that logo that I always wanted to have an album with that.
Everything about that band was perfect on that album. They should have been the next Judas Priest right here, but unfortunately they weren't record company bullshit. But anyway, he had a Silver Cloud studio. He worked with all these bands. His partner Warren Croyle, they talked about doing a documentary, and and Joe said, well, look, if you're going to do that, I got to bring Bob on to direct it. And so Joe became the producer and filmed everything. And then I brought my buddy Carl Alvarez on we're talking on the first one, like a Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, which was our first one, which cover the Van Halen era, the late 70s into the 80s, which really tells the story of how the LA metal scene developed. And as you know, each movie is 2 parts, but that's how that started. And again, when we started it, we kind of got together and we said, well, look, if I'm going to do this, let's do this right. Let's cover the whole spectrum. And, we didn't intend it to be 3 movies on the LA scene with all 2 parts, and then a Bay Area one with 2 parts, 8 movies total. We just thought we're going to do a documentary, and that's just kind of how it turned into, because I wanted to make it, and everyone agreed. I said, if we do it, let's do it right. Let's really cover the whole scene and talk from the beginning era, which nobody covered, bands like, early Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads, when they were huge and playing alongside of Van Halen and Yesterday and Today used to come out here all the time. You had Snow, Smile, A La Carte, Greg Leon Invasion, Stormer, all these LA bands that were, packing the Starwoods, 600 people, a night. And that was what started the LA scene, and a lot of people don't know that era. So that's where we began. And just like in the Bay Area, when we started, with Y&T, Yesterday and Today, and kind
which
of
is such an important band. Like, I love that it's such an some people might not know what an important band,
Well, that's what the idea is, because you mentioned Y&T to people, even metalheads, they're like, oh yeah, they're like an LA glam band, Summertime Girls. They go, no, dude, they were around
UFO
74. Van Halen used to open up for them in the clubs. I mean, that's how early on they were.
I remember having a conversation with Tommy Lee and say him, like, Leonard Hayes is one of biggest influences. Leonard Hayes is like the John Bonham of that era.
Yeah, everyone said the same thing. Thunderfoot, man, is 1 foot on that bass pedal. They were such an influential band. Dave Medichetti never got the props, of course. Everyone knows them as their hit, their MTV hits, and that's kind of what we wanted. We wanted to kind of really give people an education and just let them know the real story, because it's been smeared so many times, and so I thought it was. I'm really happy with it. I'm happy that people like you are happy with it. I mean, of course, there are those people that are just they just want the drama and the stuff. They don't want to sit through 2 hours of just. But that's what I think documentaries are. It's an education. It should be. You should learn and really realize what it was like back then, and that's what I think we captured here.
Well, it's like, if you're in the LA scene, Paul Black is such an important part of the Guns N' Roses story and the LA Gun story, who sang for Black Cherry.
Right.
So I know Black Cherry, but with this, I go, wait, he's got Craig from Ruffians. He's got Billy Rowe. You've got the guys from Reality Check. This is the real street, ground level up. When I was watching the credits after having seen everybody, like, there is some street underneath this, which is what this music was built on. That's what really resonated with me too.
Yeah, well, it's made it so much easier now with social media, with Facebook, how to find a lot of these guys that we didn't know. And of course, like I said, John Stranansky grew up with these guys from the early 80s. He grew up on the scene, was at the Stone, all the early Metallica shows. He was friends with Lars as well. And so he knew all these people and had the connections. So he would come up on the weekends. We would call these guys. It was so much fun. We'd get together at the hotel or whatever that we're at, film a bunch of interviews, and they loved it, to talk about those early days and just to bring that back. And, we really want to cover that whole spectrum, because and that was the thing about, how LA, we didn't want to do it on just glam, because LA is known as glam. So we want to show there were a lot of other metal bands, and not just thrash metal, but like the Armored Saints, the Warriors, the Racer X, Malice, Lizzie Borden, bands that weren't glam or weren't thrash, but were heavy, that had more of a European style of metal. And same with in San Francisco, there were a lot of those kind of bands. There were a lot of glam bands, as you mentioned, Jet Boy, Vane, Head On, Roadrunner. And we wanted to really get all that kind of stuff in there. And, I knew that, Murder in the Front Row, which is a great documentary that was coming out, when, I had heard about that when that was filmed. And I know that's based on the thrash era. So, we didn't want to base this, not just because of that, because, we followed the trend of what we did with the LA titles and get everything, but we really made a focus to get some of these people that, were kind of underground, didn't know. I mean, Craig Beerhorse, all these other, or, Davy Vane, people that were kind of forgotten about. And Davy Vane was such a huge part. And even he played a huge role in the thrash scene, producing the Death Angel records. And so there was, even though there was, of course, that fuck glam fag, you're probably in the Bay Area, they appreciated Davy Vane because he worked with Death and so there was a camaraderie. I mean, there was that competition, but there was definitely a camaraderie. And then having people like Jimmy Arsenault, who was a big promoter, who said,
just like, oh my God, I mean, when he booked my shows up here, Jimmy is like, all the people you picked are perfect in this, man.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there were other people we would have liked to got and, like to get, like a Tony Isabella or someone like that. But we got who we could find, and we want to make it kind of a balance of, promoters, record label people. We had Mike Varney in there, which is great. He talked about the early days of the Bay Area scene. Of course, all the artists and, record store guys. We got Bill Burkhart just before he passed away, which was fantastic to get him involved. And Bob Gamber, it was great. He was at both the Record Exchange and the Record Vault.
And I've heard so many legends about these record stores from Captain Jeff and the people from the Bay Area that these were so important, that something about the message machine at the fucking record store, like they would say when Ride the Lightning or when there was going to be an in-store, like, wow, it just, you painted that picture. Great, man. And dude, all these street guys, but then you get Lars in it, which really, dude, he was great. I've seen him in a million things where sometimes it can be generic. He went in deep, the levels of like being at Motorhead practice. He was in. How did you get that? That was pretty cool.
Well, we did, again, like I said, I knew Lars before he formed Metallica. I lived in Huntington Beach, as you know, and he lived in Newport Beach. So my friend Patrick Scott got to know him through and that ad in Recycler. Actually, Pat went to his house and then called me, dude, you got to meet this guy. He's got the ultimate metal collection. And we didn't even know he was like forming. I mean, he knew he was forming a band from Recycler, but we just knew him as this metal kid. And so we've had that relationship, Lars and I, and that never ended. I thought, wow, it's going to be weird talking to Lars because we kind of lost touch over the years a bit, but it was just like talking to him as a teenage kid. We just, and we were going to get like 20 minutes. We drove up to Metallica HQ. He gave us over an hour, and we got him in every documentary that we did. All the Inside Metals, the Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, LA Scene Explodes, Rise of LA Thrash Metal, and the Bay Area Godfathers. And we were able to piece apart quotes of his that coordinated with each film. And that was great. And he was great. He was just talking as a fan and just sat back, and you could tell he loved it. He loves talking about that era, as do all these guys. It brings back memories, and they like talking to people that lived it, with them and that could relate to it. So yeah, Lars is fantastic. He's great. Would have been cool to get a couple of the other guys as well, but didn't have a chance to get them. But we got pretty much all the guys from each band, who I think is the people that really were the most talkative and had the best memories of that era. And like Lars's memory is fantastic.
Yeah, it was really good. Were you nervous going up to HQ to film? I mean, I know I've done something. Were you nervous to go up there and just film?
Kind of, but as soon as I sat down with Lars, it was kind of a surreal thing because we're in the HQ office, and but as soon as I sat down with him, it was just like I was an 18-year-old kid again, just talking metal with my friend, and that's how it was. But yeah, it was a good experience. They're great. Everyone at Metallica HQ, give them the props for hooking that up. Bree and Barbara at the time, I think, set that up. But yeah, really great people over there.
Now, where's the best way? I went on Amazon. I had Amazon Prime. I rented them. They were like $2 or $3 to rent these, but what's the best way for people to watch these? You can send me links and I'll put them in the chat, but what's the best
Amazon Prime were you able to watch part 2 on Amazon Prime?
Well, I'm going to go watch part 2. I think it's up there. I watched just because I found about these last week. So I did the LA Scene and the Bay Area Godfathers. So I'll go back, but I did see it there.
Oh, it did. Okay. Cause part 2, I think it is now available for streaming.
Yeah, I saw it up there.
That's great. Yeah, because I've heard different stuff. We had a little niche, little problem there with some QC issues, so we had to have it back. So that got delayed for digital. But I believe
What's
you
the
can
QC issue?
Quality control.
Oh, okay. Right.
There was something was in mono or something.
Okay. Okay.
So at digital, they're very strict about that. And it passed, and then it came back, and then we're like, oh, we had to get it fixed, and it was just a hassle, but we got it
right.
done.
Yeah.
But anyway, both of them are out on DVD. All of them are out on DVD, which you could order from, wherever you order DVDs, Amazon, Best Buy, Walmart.com, whatever. You could get the DVDs, or at your favorite, record store should have them. And as far as the streaming, Amazon Prime seems to be the go-to. You can get it off iTunes or Apple, I guess Apple Movies, they call it now. Google, it was Google Play. Now I think it's all YouTube. You could pay for it for like $3 on YouTube.
Yeah, they're out there.
Yeah, it's out there. So you could go on all the digital. Vudu has it. A lot of the titles. So it's weird because the Bay Area Godfathers, I think Warren wanted to separate that a bit from the Inside Metal. He didn't want it all.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
It's part of the Inside Metal series in a way, but it's not listed. You have on Bay. If you go Inside Metal, you'll get all the 3 LA metal titles. But for Bay Area Godfathers, you have to type in Bay Area Godfathers, and that'll come up. And it's great that part 2 is finally up on digital. So
yeah, and I'll put links to all this too.
Yeah, I'll send you the links.
And you also have the Shockwave Skull sessions that I just last night on my way home from work, I saw Bob Daisley's on. And is this correct?
Yeah, that was the latest one we did. I've had Bob on a few times, and he's got a new project, not a metal project, but a really cool new project. So of course we had him back on, and of course we always talk about the past. And on this one, he got really deep into the Rainbow era, which was my favorite. I
heard him say the part of it just where he's walking up to the Rainbow from the whiskey to get in Rainbow, and Richie Blackmore applauds him coming in.
Yeah. So it's cool. Bob's a great guy, one of my favorite all-time bass players. Such a amazing guy. And people that don't know, he basically wrote the first 2 Blizzard of Oz records. Do
you talk about some of that? There's so much mystery around Bob Daisley that
we did.
Okay,
he's talked about that so many times, and it's in his book. He's got a great book called For Fact's Sake. Yeah, and it's all in there. But yeah, he talks about that whole experience and how that came together.
And Shockwave Skull Sessions is the YouTube thing, right? People can just go on YouTube and watch.
On YouTube, yeah, you could go. It's on all the different podcasts. I don't, my producer partner Matt Hartnett sets that up through the CMS Podcast Network, and so you could just go on there and find out all the links. Or just go to shockwaveskullsessions.com and I'll take you right to there.
I'll put links in. Well, thank you so much, Bob. This has been great, and I can't wait to turn people onto these movies.
All right, Brett, I appreciate it, man. You take care.
Okay, hang out so I can say goodbye to you.